This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of October 9th, 2022. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Happy Thanksgiving and welcome to edition number 259. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And on the big deal feature, another installment of MMA, Mackin, Mario, and Andy. Mario Canseco of Research Co. and Andy Yan of the Simon & Fraser University City program join me again to look back at the week that was on the road to the October 15th local elections. But first, is it just me? Is it just me, or is the Kitts Point Residents Association filing in BC Supreme Court the latest sign that democracy is dying at City Hall? Kitts Point Residents Association wants a BC Supreme Court judge to declare that City Council broke the law by deciding to make a utilities services deal with the Squamish Nation behind closed doors, rather than putting it into an open council meeting where residents could have spoken for or against the deal before a City Council vote. Neighbours of the massive 11-tower Cenac development near the Burrard Bridge, which has started construction, wonder what is to become of their neighbourhood in the decade to come and why their voices aren't heard about the future of Vanier Park. The Squamish Nation got approval from the federal government in a secretive process because the reserve land is under the Federal Indian Act, not municipal jurisdiction. Did City Hall get the best deal possible for Vancouver taxpayers and for livability in Kitts Point and Southwest Falls Creek? Could City Hall have negotiated with the Squamish Nation for a more sustainable development? It should be noted that the Squamish Nation's builder is Westbank Developments, whose CEO Ian Gillespie is one of Mayor Kennedy Stewart's fundraising captains. The board of the Squamish Nation's Incate Company includes Mike McGee, the former Chief of Staff to Vision Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, and Kristen Rivers, a Squamish Nation council member who is running for Park Board with the One City Party. One City is the party that's supported by her brother Dustin Rivers, who is co-author of the party's election platform. All in the family. City Hall decided many years ago that Vancouver would be a city of reconciliation, which is a noble goal after all these years. But it also needs to be a city of democracy and transparency. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. It's MMA time again on the Breaker.news podcast as local government elections are almost upon us. Time for Mackin, that's me, Mario, and Andy, MMA. Mario Canseco, the president of Research Co., and Andy Yan, the director of the city program at Simon Fraser University, join me again to look at the race to October 15th. First topic, endorsements. Last week, the Vancouver Police Union endorsed Ken Sim. David Eby endorsed Kennedy Stewart. Vision Vancouver endorsed Kennedy Stewart. Larry Campbell endorsed Melissa DiGenova. And Patrick Condon endorsed Colleen Hardwick. Of all those endorsements, who benefits the most? Which one matters the most? Mario.
Well, the police union thing is going to be a significant deal, particularly because it's going to push people who are maybe thinking of the MPA and are thinking about crime and public safety to essentially cross over to ABC. So I think that one's important because it changes the dynamics of the race. Patrick Condon's endorsement is good for 0.9% of the vote. We saw that with Sean Cassidy back in 2018. So it's not going to have a monumental effect on how the race is going to fall. The Vision Vancouver endorsement is not a surprise. It's not as if they were going to ask people to vote for ABC or for Colleen Hardwick. But it might be a case for the Kennedy Stewart campaign of maybe this is not the right moment when I want to hear the words vision associated with my campaign. So I think they're going to take that maybe not as seriously as some other endorsements. And the real surprise here is to see a former mayor from Cope essentially saying that we should elect at least one MPA member, the one who actually has a chance of winning. I think that one was particularly surprising.
Andy Yan, speaking of that endorsement, that was Larry Campbell, the former mayor who became a senator, endorsing Melissa DiGenova from the NPA. Larry Campbell is also infamous for being a director of Great Canadian Gaming, the company that ran River Rock Casino in Richmond, the epicenter of British Columbia's money laundering scandal. So here you have a candidate from the Law and Order NPA getting endorsed by someone who made decisions on the board of a casino company with a spotty record. Is that a detrimental endorsement? Of all those endorsements, is that the worst one?
Well, I think the question is, are all bets off? That will this ultimately, I think, help Melissa DeGenova or not? I think that it's a really interesting race. I think that all these endorsements are really intended to really, I think, now see a different phase in the election in terms of motivating a base, in terms of our ground game, in terms of kind of having a particular kind of check in terms of getting people out to vote. And I think that it's really, we're now entering this kind of terminal phase of the election, and really. It's now getting everybody out to vote. And I think that it's interesting to see who's endorsing whom. But then I think at the same time, it really will be the kind of ground game for all these parties to kind of get that vote out. So I'm just curious if it even matters. Like if it is really now going to be these endorsements, or really going to be people able to kind of get their voters to really energize their base to show up to vote, because so much of, I think, civic elections are based upon participation and who gets their groups out to vote. And that's going to be a key thing, and much less really what they're saying in terms of, okay, well, this endorsement matters, or I just will vote this other way. So some interesting questions here.
Speaking of doesn't matter, more transit talk this week. Of course, we talked last week about Kennedy Stewart and his idea for the SkyTrain loop to get the SkyTrain to UBC and then ricochet it all the way back across Vancouver to Metrotown. Well, this week we had Canseco and the mayors of Coquitlam and North Vancouver District getting together and saying, hey, how about SkyTrain to the Hastings Park and then shoot it over the Second Narrows to North Vancouver. And then you had Colleen Hardwick saying, no, let's not send SkyTrain to UBC because you can use that money and pay for light rail everywhere. These are, again, very aspirational promises, but does this matter in the long run? Does this matter in the short run for this October 15th civic election? Andy?
Well, it seems to be just largely aspirational, because I think there was just recently, relatively recently, the publication of Transport 2050, which is the TransLink plan well into 2050. And indeed, some of these links have been talked about, but they haven't been defined by exactly what kind of technologies. And actually, a lot of times the technologies they're talking about is light rail as opposed to SkyTrain. And I think that in such a short time, and also really how it is still very much a regional decision in terms of priorities, these are, I think, ways of kind of capturing attention, but the actual implementation is amongst just one mayor, I think, is entirely a big question. Now, that being said, I think the regional approach that actually just reaching out to get 2 additional mayoral candidates, and it's important to note that they're mayoral candidates along with Ken Sim, was an interesting move. I think that kind of begins to recognize how much it's actually transportation is a regional action as opposed to just one city, and not the political party, just put that in there right now, but that it's really how you require a regional approach amongst cooperation and agreement and a little bit of horse trading. Speaking of transportation, that is involved in terms of making sure these transportation systems work and that they're effective.
Mario.
Well, we've known for months that Colleen Hardwick isn't thrilled with the SkyTrain going to UBC, so having an alternate proposal was something that was in the works. I think it's going to be complicated to convince people that light rail is the right course of action. People might be just too set in their ways and expecting a SkyTrain to go wherever it has to go. And it still has to go through a lot of issues as far as the aspirations are concerned. I think it was a week of ups and downs for Ken Sim. I think the expectation from the people who were managing his campaign was to have him be set up to put this in West Wing terms in a way that was presidential. Here's somebody who is talking to another 2 leaders from the Lower Mainland, and they're talking about something that makes sense, and the photo ops are perfect. And, this is a man who you can trust to be in charge of the largest city in the Lower Mainland. And less than 48 hours later, he forgets the name of the housing minister provincially and federally. So he didn't look particularly presidential on that one. I think it's certainly part of a complication as far as the way in which he tries to sell this, because it might be attractive for some people who don't live in the city, but until we amalgamate, these aren't necessarily promises that are going to get the voters to look at you more seriously. They want something that is closer to home, and offering them something where you're actually participating with two mayors looks great. It might be a fantastic front page photo, but it's not something that is going to change the minds of voters locally.
A story I broke this week headlined ABC councillors supported their mayoral candidate's landlord on zoning application. Bonus Properties in July overcame staff criticism about their 800 Granville proposal, thanks to ABC councillor Sarah Kirby-Young. The Bonus family has donated more than $7,000 to ABC. The Bonus family is also the landlord for Ken Sims' Rosemary Rock Salt Bagel Deli on Commercial Drive. This apparently was a hot bagel topic, because nobody from ABC got back to me for comment. Meanwhile, Elections BC said Kennedy Stewart's fundraising captains list did not break the law, but Pacific Prosperity Network, the Chip Wilson-founded Dark Money Political Action Committee, was fined $1,000 for not registering as a third-party advertiser, either provincially or municipally.
Right, which highlights actually probably one of the biggest, I think, loopholes in this entire process is really, I think, these types of groups coming in and trying to kind of, I think, influence the kind of decisions and policies that are going to be, I think, put forward on council. I think that, you know, and then at the same time, the fines that are involved, the $1,000 fine, or as I like to say, 7 yoga pants. That does it really make a difference? Is there really the kind of penalties that I think really convince people not to do this type of behavior, or really the slap on the wrist really is really worth it compared to what the overall political payoff could be? And I think that that's really, I think, one of the, I think, missed loopholes that really do need to be closed.
Well, if the fine had been higher, I would be the first one to say, I think they're done. I think they're not going to do anything in the next few days. I don't think they're going to be endorsing a candidate or suggesting that somebody should be put out of office. But because the fine is so low, I think they're going to look at it as, hey, we got by with a slap on the wrist. We have a significant war chest. Let's continue to misbehave and just paying these fines because it's not something that is going to hurt our bottom line. This really speaks to the problem, not only on the enforcement of political malfeasance, but also on how easy it is to get your name on the ballot. You know, if we continue to allow a system where 25 signatures and $100 deposit is going to allow you to be on the ballot, then we continue to have the same situation where the fines are going to be done within that same frame of mind. So, you know, $500 might seem like a lot if you're finding a candidate who decided to misbehave or who did something that they weren't supposed to do, if their deposit is 100. But when you're Pacific Prosperity Network, as Andy says, this is just 6 yoga pants.
Team for Livable Vancouver mayoral candidate Colleen Hardwick's big promise of the week, a plebiscite on the 2030 Olympics bid. She tried in April and July at City Council to no avail, but now she's asking the public to support her at the ballot box.
Well, I think this really, I think, touches upon really the not only that specific element of how whether we should or should not be getting a Olympics. It's really transparency and governance. And in these very, very big decisions through which can see the movement of hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of dollars, should they not be transparent? Should they be, I think, of public interest to a visible public debate, and indeed perhaps a public decision over something this significant in the operations of the city, which have significant impact, a potential significant impact towards city coffers. And so I think that this really, I think, highlights probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of the question for whomever is going to win, really the role of governance in Vancouver and how those major decisions should be made.
Well, I have 2 points on this. When the bid for 2010 was won, the mayor was Larry Campbell. The mayor who gets the flag in Turin is Sam Sullivan. And the mayor who opens the game is Gregor Robertson. So we didn't have a lot of involvement as far as political parties championing an issue. Yes, COPE is very interested in having the Olympics come here. Larry Campbell essentially said, you guys figure it out and we'll do it. Sam Sullivan gets the chance to go to Turin and get the Olympic flag. And then Gregor Robertson is the one who's making all the interviews when the Olympics are here. So it's not necessarily a political issue in my mind. Now, the complexity of a referendum in this case is twofold. We know that Kennedy Stewart's government signed a document to say that this is something that should be explored. So you know that he maybe doesn't want this to be thrown out. And Colleen Hardwick has been very adamant on the fact that she doesn't want to see this happen. So regardless of where this goes, you need to be very careful on the type of question that you have, and also having all of the data that you need in place. We still don't know how much the 2010 Olympics cost. We probably won't know this before the end of 2025. So are we voting on something based on whether we trust VANOC? And the answer to that, because I've done the polling on this, is no, we don't. But is that enough to get people to say, we don't want the Olympics here again because we don't actually have the full accounting? So this becomes an exercise of, gee, it would be great to have the Olympics here, which is pretty much how the 2003 referendum went. But if we want to have a significant exercise where we know exactly how much things are going to cost, you're essentially taking the word from the yes side and the no side without the real data to prove it.
Now, here we go, because we're running out of time for Election Day. We are ending our preview with this edition, and next week is the real deal, actual voting day, when the public will tell us what they want for the next 4 years. And so I guess the question is, who do you think will become mayor, and what do you think city council will look like? Get your predictions. Mario, start with you, because you're the pollster who did the most.
You got the inside track here.
Well,
so where do you think
inside
will fall on October 15th?
You know how I feel about calling elections a week early. I would like to have the opportunity to look into something closer to the election, especially something as close as this one, where they're essentially separated by the margin of error.
Yeah.
I think it could still go either way. I don't see a way in which the election doesn't end in a mayor with the initials KS. And what happens ultimately is the control of council. And in that sense, I think we could be looking at 4 or 3 Forward Together candidates being elected, 4 or 3 ABC candidates being elected, 2 Greens, 1 City, and that's your council. So it's really going to come down to which one, either Forward or ABC, gets that 4th seat in order to be able to do something that is going to be meaningful. Otherwise, we could be in a situation where the mayor doesn't have a majority, and we're in the same conundrum that we find ourselves in right now.
Right.
And we are going to do sorry later, right?
Well, I mean, I always say I have this unique ability to predict the past, and I think that this is, one of those elections. I think certainly through the polling that Mario has done, I think is really interesting to kind of see the margin of error. I think in one way, it's the fact that there isn't necessarily the incumbent benefit or the 2 or 3 points on top of the incumbent, which kind of makes me go like, wow, this is really going to be a tight race, and it's going to be all about mobilization. I mean, we still have, I think, a moment through which some major stumble could really kind of trip things. But I think that it is, you're right, is that I think that, there's an interesting question, what will happen with between Kennedy Stewart and Ken Sim. I think that Colleen Hardwick, I think it's interesting, what's going to happen with Colleen Hardwick in that competition. But of course, the major issue is it's all about council. That I think that it's a question of in council and whether, say, there's a halo effect that Kennedy Stewart's able to get his candidates on, or Ken Sim is able to get his candidates on. And I think that, the interesting things I think we'll be seeing if the Greens come back, and I think the Greens can come back because they're the kind of respectable kind of place where you have a few votes, you'll vote for them. And I think that, kind of have that kind of how the system can actually kind of help, I think the Greens kind of maintain a couple of seats. And then similarly, I think the question is, will one city similarly be able to kind of expand without having necessarily a electoral candidate to kind of be part of this? But that's what both the Greens and one city are facing. And so I think that that's going to be another, because I think really the race to watch, I mean, it's interesting to mention the mayoral race, but then it's going to be the council race. And hopefully, with this, whoever this council is going to look like, I mean, hopefully it's not going to look like, the warlord period of pre-revolutionary China in towards the kind of decision making and the kind of conversations occur.
Meanwhile, in Surrey, a race like no other, with a group of veterans trying to become mayor, and one trying to hold on to the seat. Current Trudeau Liberal MP Suk Dhaliwal, current Horgan NDP MLA Ginny Sims, former MP, MLA, and White Rock Mayor Gordie Hogue, current City Councillor Brenda Locke, all vying to beat Mayor Doug McCallum. who has a trial on public mischief charges scheduled for October 31st.
Ginny Sims threw a promise out there. She wants a 10,000-seat stadium and a new arts center. Of course, Doug McCallum started the whole thing off wanting a 60,000-seat stadium. And then Doug McCallum this week made a huge promise, a 4-year tax freeze, but he hasn't given many details about how he'd achieve that. And he didn't go to the Board of Trade debate to take questions about it. He was a bit of a no-show there. So where do you think the chips will fall in Surrey? Andy?
Well, I think that part of this is really highlighting how the city of Surrey is one of the fastest growing municipalities in Canada, much less one of the fastest changing municipalities in Canada, I think, through which brings into a certain set of demographic and political realities through which I think we see shifts and changes through which I think the past isn't very useful towards predicting what the future might look like. So I think that in one way, that's a really big race to kind of see whether we see a new Surrey emerge, or does the kind of older Surrey kind of still hang on in there? And really, I think how electoral math occurs in terms of splitting votes and how that might look like as past, present, and future Surreys all come in and determine who mayor and council will be. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think more than any polling data that I could have at my disposal, which I don't, the actions of Doug McCallum over the past week are not consistent with somebody who thinks that he's in a good position to win. The fact that he pushed all of those development applications on the final opportunity where he had, those are not the actions of a man who is confident of victory. That being said, there's something about the past in Surrey that I do think is relevant, and that is that it's not a place that is afraid to vote for women. Diane Watts was mayor for a long time. Linda Hebner won the election pretty handily with more than half of the vote. And then the last election, we did not have a female mayoral candidate from any of the major parties. And that enables McCallum to win coming up through the middle. This is a different one. I think Brenda Locke has run a fantastic campaign. She's very well known. And I think it's somebody who could conceivably win. Ginny Sims has Stephen Carter as the campaign manager, and we know the miracles that he's pulled, taking Naheed Nenshi from 8% to winning the election in Calgary. I think it's between either of the two. But certainly the actions of McCallum would suggest that he doesn't think that he's going to win. And this is one of the reasons. It's almost like the final hours of a president, essentially pardoning friends and relatives.
There we have it. Doug McCallum is going down in defeat, and there will be a KS on the mayor's office door in Vancouver after October 15th. Wherever you are in British Columbia, get out and vote October 15th. You won't get another chance for 4 years.
Exercise your franchise, people.
Yes, get your vote on.
Thanks very much. Thanks again.
Thank you.
That's MMA for this week. Thanks to my guest Mario Canseco of Research Co. and Andy Yan of the Simon Fraser University City Program. Now it's time on the theBreaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In the Taiwan news, Taiwan's total trade for 2021 reaches $840 billion, 16th in the world. The Minister of Economic Affairs noted Taiwan's trade in 2021 surpassed Vietnam and Spain. Wang Meiwa announced October 5th that the combined value of Taiwan's imports and exports was $840 billion. The value of Taiwan's exports reached $446.4 billion in 2021, which represents a year-over-year increase of 29%. In the Kyoto news, publisher Katakawa's chairman indicted over Olympics bribery. Sugohiko Katakawa was indicted for giving $500,000 in bribes to the former executive, Haruyuki Takahashi, in return for the company being selected as a sponsor of the Tokyo Olympics. Katakawa released a statement through his lawyers, saying he intends to step down as chairman but denied the allegation, as he has consistently done since he was arrested September 14th. In the Hong Kong Free Press, critics tackle Aussie rugby star Nick Honey Badger Cummins over videos for Hong Kong Tourism Board. The three-part video series called Honey Badger by Hong Kong, in which Cummins visits tourist attractions and tries his hand at martial arts, was unlisted from YouTube, meaning that the clips could be watched by those with a link but did not appear on the HKTB channel. Cummins has been accused by one critic of, quote, endorsing a government that is violating human rights after appearing in a series of videos to promote the city as a carefree and apparently COVID-free tourist destination. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, NWSL Players Association calls out Portland Thorns in statement on U.S. soccer investigation. The Thorns on Wednesday fired President of Soccer Gavin Wilkinson and President of Business Mike Golub after revelations in the U.S. Soccer report that included damning information about both men, and after the Oregonian reported on an alleged toxic work environment under Golub. Despite calls from fans and the players, Merritt Paulson has yet to sell the Thorns or Timbers as the club awaits the results of the NWSL investigation, which is set to be completed later this year. Although Paulson has stepped aside from Thorns-related decision-making, the Players Association statement said, quote, what individuals at those clubs knew and when is crucial to having a complete understanding of what and who failed us and why, end quote. In Como news, Buttigieg visits King County to announce new program to help Northwest salmon. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in King County Thursday to announce a grant program meant to help local communities remove and repair culverts around roads that can prevent salmon and other fish from passing. The funding is part of the National Culvert Removal, Replacement, and Restoration Culvert Aquatic Organism Passage Program, established by President Joe Biden's infrastructure law. In Czech news, new hope in serval search near Qualcomm Beach after another sighting. The search for a missing pregnant exotic cat near Qualcomm Beach stretched into another day, but its owners have new hope in finding it. A female African serval is on the loose also in Greater Victoria. It's the third exotic cat of its kind to escape its Vancouver Island home last week. The BC Conservation Officer Service said it is aware of the situation, but noted servals aren't regulated under controlled alien species regulations, meaning that cats fall outside their mandate since they can be lawfully owned in BC. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo Bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to foster parents, the people who care for children who need a home for whatever reason. October is Foster Family Month in BC. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo Bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of October 9th, 2022. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 9th of October in 1986, Fox TV launched as the fourth network in the U.S.? It's the network that brought us the glowing hockey puck and The Simpsons. Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. That's patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. happy Thanksgiving, and don't forget to vote in your local election on October 15th. Until next week.